Hey guys, I just want to show you this crazy thing that I built. So here at this base, I have a short-range teleporter that goes down to a little puzzle room that I've made. In this little puzzle room, you can turn on 4 different switches that act like a password, and if you do it properly, the door opens. But if you happen to choose a wrong entry, that will end up closing this door. It takes a second, but it does eventually get there. And what's interesting is the way this is configured is it is really a 5-state input that determines the door. So that has to be on, 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 and all the others have to be in an off state. And if all of the others aren't in off state, then that's considered to not satisfy the conditions for the password. What that means is, if I turn on this one, even though that was the second to be turned on, if I turn off this, and then turn off this, it doesn't matter the order that I turn them on or off, the door will sort itself out, because all that it really requires is that all of these ones that are red stay red. And so here's how this crazy thing works. So these are just the wires, surprisingly, to light the floor. And this entire mess is basically just that as well. This is hooking up the switches to the power for the plates on the ground. Where the actual logic occurs is in this bit above. This is like walking around inside of an integrated circuit. So let's see if I can actually orient myself. There we go. Just go back over here, go up to the Alright, so the way that this works is surprisingly not that complicated. This is really just like a XOR switch. A XOR switch, or an XOR switch, depending on how you want to call it, really just tracks an exclusive OR, meaning either this is on or that's on. And so when you have a switch or a toggle, it already natively has that capacity to be either off or on. But the difficulty is in tracking which state is which. So in the case when the right ones are toggled on, I want to be able to send that signal so the entire thing will open the door. And when they're off, I need to know if any of them are not in an off state when it's one of the ones that is not part of the password. So what you're seeing here, to try to explain this in more detail, this piece right here is coming from the switch. This is tracking the off state. This is tracking the on state. And when the switch is off, as it is right here, it ends up going to this little auto switch, which is just a pass-through, and the pass-through happens to be powered by this line right here, and if it so happens that any one of these switches, which should not be on, is on, it actually breaks the connection. And that means that the bit ends up being unset and the door will then close. So this acts as a logical AND gate, in a sense. And just to show how this works, so if we look at this one right here, and turn this one on, so the power will then come on to red, and because that goes red, it'll turn off the bit for that information. Look this. Take a second, but we'll see the door close. Close. And sure enough, that switch is now enabled, and because the false part of the switch is now in the off state, it broke the flow for that particular connection. So therefore, it knows that one of the wrong switches is enabled, and therefore the password is incorrect. And so that's all I've done for all of these individual switches. The logic for the password component is actually very simple. It's just an inverter or a NAND switch. I put all of that right here. Those all need to be in the off state for this thing to Anyhow, so the real guts of this, and the real logic is actually this right here. This little piece is actually, oh, that's funny. That was unintentional. This little piece is just for testing purposes. It actually doesn't affect this, so you can safely ignore that. But this piece right here is called a gated latch. Specifically, this is a gated SR latch, and that means that it has a, in this case, this is the set pin, and this is the reset pin. These are there for testing purposes as well, but they don't really affect anything otherwise. That's why they're red. But this thing is the power coming in, and then there are two auto switches, two NANDs, and this is, again, just a way to track the state of this little circuit. So, how it works, to not go into the nitty-gritties of each of these individual subgates, is if any of the switches that shouldn't be enabled are enabled, this thing gets the set signal. And in its default state, this is set to red. And so when that happens, and this is set to blue, like it is right now, or on, that means that one of the switches that shouldn't be on is on. This right here, as the reset, converts that back to a false state. And the problem with this whole setup is if I just had one input, or yeah, I guess one input for this particular switch coming in for the reset, meaning like think of this particular switch which would be in the upper left-hand corner. If I just took this this signal for this positive thing right here, which would tell it to turn on, because that means that this switch, which shouldn't be on for the pass to be satisfied, is enabled. But if the person turned it off, then this would go on, meaning that it's now reset and has the chance to potentially be solved correctly. So, in other words, if the person has already put in the correct password but they turned on this switch, this would prevent the door from opening. But if the person turned it back off, this is the false switch, and the false switch then sets the... well, I guess that's one way to demonstrate it. The false is supposed to send a reset signal to turn this into the false state. But the problem is, imagine I had this switch on and this switch on. So this switch shouldn't be enabled and this switch shouldn't be enabled. So if the person turned this switch off, so it's in the off state, and it set the reset signal, this would go into the off state, but this switch would still be on, and it's not supposed to be on. And therefore a person would be able to get through the door despite the fact that the password hasn't been satisfied. So the whole point of this entire system, and the reason all of these AND gates exist, is that all of them have to be off for a reset signal to go through. So it's actually very simple for the set signal. Whenever a person turns on a wrong switch, the set state is triggered, and that guarantees that it will remember that something bad has happened. To reset that bad state requires more complex logic for all of them to be off as the AND. And then once that's back into the off state, we can go down and turn that off. See what that looks like. So this is the one that's causing us the problems, the one in the bottom left. The door will open. Then that's set to false, and because that's set to false, this circuit right here, everything is off, and therefore the door will open because it's no longer receiving power, and power is necessary to keep the door closed. And so that's how this little puzzle works. It really is just a bunch of, I guess you could call these half Zors, if you want to call it that, or a janky Zor, as I was referring to it to a couple of other people. And the gated SR latch, and then the logical AND series. And from this simple little logic gate, you can create this interesting puzzle in No Man's Sky, which to me is probably one of the coolest things I've seen in a video game in a long time. That you can really build any logical circuit you want using the NAND gates. And that's pretty much all it is. They just give you the NAND gate, which allows functional completeness. Anyhow, I thought I'd share. I thought it was pretty neat, and signing out.